presentation. I invited her over. I thought we've got to have that Bettakultcha because it's exactly what we need here. So please give it up for Joanne.
Okay. Hello, I'm Jo. I publish Pamphlet Press. I'm an artist, writer, and I'm fascinated by everyday life and the strange things that I see around me. Tonight I'm going to be talking about chewing gum, which is a thing that fascinates me at present. And hopefully we're going to get some pictures. Firstly, I started noticing chewing gum about when I saw people removing it from the streets. At first I thought it was some weird hazard or an accident, some terrible thing had happened. Instead I realised it was just scraping gum from the street. Sometimes when the gum's been removed, it looks as if it's been just like newly laid paving. At other times, it's like a weird urban calligraphy that's kind of going on. And sometimes it's a bit like those bits when you've picked off a scab and you've got that little sort of soft bit of skin that's underneath. I started getting really obsessed by the sort of the colour that was there, the sort of the sootiest blacks, the freshly dropped white bits, and the kind of infinity of greys that was there in between. Sometimes it seemed like a weird murky constellation, a bit like looking at the stars but kind of looking at the murky bits on the ground. And I started getting really fascinated by this, but then realised that actually I'd not had an original thought at all, because a whole bunch of other artists were already thinking this. Loads of artists doing these kind of pavement constellations, thinking about a kind of pavement astronomy that was going on. And I realised I wasn't very original ever at all. Some people were really fascinated by the idea almost of the astronomical amount of gum that's on the ground. In Athens, Georgia, in America, a bunch of people were painting every bit of gum pink along the street to make clear just how much of this stuff had been dropped. I found that quite fascinating. Other people, like Ben Wilson, have been painting small, tiny pictures on each spot of gum. He's made about 10,000 pictures through North London. Some have even included marriage proposals. Apparently it's legal because you can paint on the gum rather than the street itself. Sometimes, though, I started thinking about these bits of gum in a really microcosmic way, like maybe they're just like tiny islands, like little sort of archipelagos on the ground. And Judith Schlansky was imagining islands she'd never visited. I started thinking the same way about these bits of gum. A whole bunch of artists, like Florent Morellet, a French artist, were thinking about microcosmic landscapes, thinking about bits of lichen, as if they were almost like cities that he could kind of dream up. And I started kind of imagining these things myself. The chewing gum lichen is a common name for a bunch of kind of organisms which look like chewing gum on the street. In fact, the only one is the top right, is actually real chewing gum. I quite like that misrepresentation. However much I like the chewing gum on the ground, though, the stuff that I found on trains and like hidden in bits of like, just in furniture and things, made me feel quite different. It felt really abject and quite disgusting. And I started to think quite differently about this, realising that there's a kind of aesthetic of lumps. The source has gone wrong. There's lumpy thighs that are kind of full of cellulite. There's mumps and cancer and tumours. Lumps are not a very positive kind of phenomena. Bodies, it seems to me, have a real propensity for making lumps happen. These are bezoars, which are the sort of indigestible material that's been trapped in your gut, in your trachea, in various bits. They were considered to be a universal antidote to poison. But of course the biggest, lumpiest thing is kind of shit, I'm afraid to say. And surely there's nothing more lumpy than the dog log that fractures into nodular sections when it hits the ground. Let's face the Keith Arnold picture, pretty grim. That kind of sense of disgust seems particularly keen with chewing gum when it gets muddled up with things. And I read this sort of solution that if you get chewing gum in your hair, you're meant to rub peanut butter into it. Like, is that even more horrific than the gum in the first place? A whole bunch of people have been really fascinated by this, making really horrific things like fridge magnets and hair slides out of chewing gum, faking chewing gum. Seems like there's a real play about those kinds of things. Chewing your own brooch, as Ted Norton suggests. I was thinking a little bit about the French surrealist Brassai, who really started noticing this sense of fiddling with things when we're not really paying attention to what we're making, who was noticing the things that we do when we're not really kind of alert to what we're actually up to. And it made me think about the way we play with things when we're bored or anxious, when we're at the pub talking to people and we fiddle with little bits of kind of crisp packets and so on. And I started thinking, I'm an artist, I started thinking about this as another way of actually making things. And it brought me finally back to Alina Shespovnikov, who actually had a show at Leeds City Art Gallery a few years ago, who made these photo sculptures of gum that was passing through her mouth. She was making a marble sculpture, but when she was actually doing that, she noticed these abstract things that were passing through her mouth. And finally she said, keep chewing, look around you.
Jolie, ladies and gentlemen.